A few weeks ago, I was hanging out with a few of my friends, and we got on the topic of Disney. So each of us decided to make a top 5 list for the Disney movies that we personally enjoy the most. Afterwards, we talked about it, and what really surprised me was just how unique each of our lists were. For sure, there was 1 or 2 movies in common between our lists, but overall, each of our lists had a lot of variation between the movies that were in them. And it was the coolest thing, because you could make a case for the films on your list, but you couldn't really argue against someone else's list and say, hey man, that movie shouldn't be on there. It just goes to show how consistent Disney can be with pumping out high quality movies that can be anyone's favorite. And although they can miss the mark sometimes, generally, Disney is always a staple for great and entertaining movies. And regardless of things such as age, culture, ethnicity, or even species, most likely there's a Disney film out there that you can relate to. So today, we're going to take a look at the top 5 Disney films that I personally enjoy watching the most. Starting off the list at number 5 is Atlantis. Now, I kind of think of Atlantis as the dark horse of Disney movies. This is mostly because it's a lot darker than the average Disney movie. For example, in Moana, we have a young girl who's traveling across the ocean, going on these adventures with her demigod friend, whereas in Atlantis, we have a group of adventurers who almost kills off an entire civilization just for a quick buck. And besides Mulan, this movie probably has more on-screen deaths than all the other Disney movies combined. But because it's so different, it really has its own chance to shine. Atlantis has some of the best world building I've ever seen. The city of Atlantis in particular, as well as everything in it, all have great designs, and it really makes this world feel so alien, but also so immersive. Not only were the Atlantean designs awesome, but so were the designs of the Explorer team. Tell me that is not one of the coolest looking submarines you have ever seen. Along with the great visuals, you also have this beautiful but kind of mysterious sounding musical score that plays over these long panning shots of this lost empire that inspire the sense of adventure and mystery. However, what really makes this film is its characters and its dialogue. There's a pretty big side cast here, but each of them is so hilarious and so memorable that you don't really feel like they're a quote-unquote side cast. Each of them have their own distinctive gimmicks, jokes, and motivations that make them all the more believable and relatable. Their dialogue is so unique that during my rewatch, I noticed that the lines of each of the characters is so filled to the brim with their personalities that you can't really give any of the lines to any other character.
Looks like we have a little roadblock. Denny, what do you think?
I could unroadblock that if I had about 200 of these. Problem is, I only got about 10, plus, 5 of my own, and a couple of cherry bombs, road flare.
It's just mind-boggling how much attention to detail and care must have gone into creating this cast. The pacing in Atlantis is also spot on. It has a pretty short runtime of about an hour and a half, but it feels like it flies by so much faster just because every scene progresses the story, whether it be through world building, character development, or even a simple action scene. If you're looking for a more mature and gritty film that's also hilarious and has great world building, I really can't recommend any Disney film more than Atlantis.
Oh, yeah.
There are despots and dictators, political manipulators.
Coming into our number 4 spot is another Disney movie that isn't talked about too much. The Emperor's New Groove. It was one of the first movies I ever remember watching, and it was so old that VCRs were still a thing when I was watching this. Back then, and even to this day, there's still no Disney movie that makes me laugh as much as this one. It pulls this off so well because this movie does not take itself seriously, like, at all. If a movie like Deadpool breaks the fourth wall, this movie doesn't even have a fourth wall. From the very get-go, the main character Kuzco is already cracking jokes and talking to the audience like we're next to him. Like seriously, this movie must have taken place hundreds of years ago, and this squirrel just whips out a goddamn balloon like it's nothing. The people who made this movie must have been on something while they were doing it, but I mean, it worked out. This movie is one of the most wacky and hilarious things I've ever seen, and honestly, I think that anybody can have a great time with it. Moving on to our bronze medal winner, we have Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. Now, before you get your pitchforks out, I'm fully aware that this movie isn't as well made or as good as the first Pirates of the Caribbean. But deep down, Dead Man's Chest just holds a special place in my heart. Because the first movie already established the world of pirates, this movie wastes no time just jumping into going batshit crazy. I know a lot of people criticize this movie for having more dumbed down humor compared to the first one, but I'm not really trying to use my brain too much during a Pirates of the Caribbean movie anyways, so I for one just kind of enjoy the humor here. With everybody's favorite undead, swashbuckling pirate Barbossa gone, this movie opened up some new room for some new villains, and oh boy, do Davy Jones and Lord Beckett not disappoint. Both of them just have the sense of power and aura about them, and unlike in many comedy films, they're actually competent and threatening villains. A lot of times, they actually beat out our heroes. Well, I don't know if you can really call the pirates heroes. I guess they're more just like protagonists. Also, as dumb as it is, you can't lie that the three-way sword fight between Jack, Will, and Norrington is hella funny and well choreographed. Like, at least they're trying to hit each other, unlike some other people.
That's not how the Force works.
I think the coolest thing about this movie is just how piratey the basic premise is. If you boil it down, it's essentially a treasure hunt movie, but with a kraken, some cannibals, and some weird-looking fishmen. It just really has a sense of adventure that makes you want to travel the world and experience the ocean. Building onto that sense of adventure is something that I think Pirates of the Caribbean doesn't get nearly enough credit for. Each location in the movie, whether it be the Cannibal Island, the Flying Dutchman, Tortuga, or the final island, all have these fun adventure sequences that make each location all the more memorable. Even before the rewatch, I could distinctly remember all those locations within the Pirates of the Caribbean universe. Trust me, I love Guardians of the Galaxy, but honestly, I can hardly remember half the locations they went to in that movie. If this were just a list for the best made Disney movies, let's be real here, Dead Man's Chest probably wouldn't be on here. But this list is just for the movies that I personally enjoy the most, and Dead Man's Chest is always a blast whenever I watch it. The number 2 spot on this list goes to none other than everyone's favorite robot love story, WALL-E. Although this movie isn't the number 1 spot, if I had to name the best made Disney movie overall, it would definitely be WALL-E. To me, WALL-E was one of the first films in what I regard as the modern generation of Disney movies. Around the same time WALL-E came out, movies such as Up, Tangled, and Ratatouille were also coming out. And I can't put my finger on exactly why, but these movies feel drastically different from the Disney classics we know and love, such as Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, and Monsters, Inc. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but after this time period, Disney movies had a very big shift in visuals as well as feel. One thing that really set WALL-E apart from any other Disney movie before it was just how breathtaking and beautiful the animation was for its time. If I didn't know any better, you could honestly tell me this film was made in 2018, and I wouldn't even doubt you at all. What really makes WALL-E my second favorite Disney film is just how pure and simple its story is. At its very core, this is a love movie between two people, and all the other plot points in this movie are essentially just obstacles that progress their adoration for one another. This movie also just feels very relaxed. Sure, there is some agency to save the Earth, but overall, the movie takes its time to build up our two main characters and really focus on their interactions. And this all works so well because of how well the movie portrays WALL-E and Eva. They are robots, they have the bodies of robots, and physically, they behave like robots. But they act human and genuine. WALL-E in particular is just so adorable because he goes through so many things that we as humans can relate to ourselves. Another reason why WALL-E's character is so likable is because of how innocent and naive he is to the world after basically living out most of his life alone on the Earth. When creating a character, many other movies mistaken being naive and ignorant for just being straight up stupid. WALL-E's mistakes are because he doesn't know any better, not because he can't think for himself, or just because he has to do everything wrong for the sake of a cheap laugh. And I really have to give this movie props because it wants to send a message, but it does so without becoming preachy or pretentious about it. It's fairly obvious just from the scenes and the backstory this movie comes with that this movie is preaching the fact that humans are slowly destroying the Earth and large companies are a threat to the world. However, it doesn't shove these ideas in our face. Usually they're just in the background or they're food for thought. Even though this is a movie for kids, it doesn't feel the need to push the idea that a character has to constantly shout out the obvious lesson that we're supposed to be learning here. Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's a lot to take away from watching WALL-E. It's a lighthearted movie that sends an important message, while also telling a heartwarming and compassionate love story. And last but not least, coming in at the number one spot is Wreck-It Ralph. No other Disney movie comes even close to how much I love Wreck-It Ralph. Honestly, if I made a top 5 movie list of all time, just including any studio or any company, Wreck-It Ralph would probably be on there too. Wreck-It Ralph is what I would describe as the modern day Toy Story. Just like Toy Story, it's also about these characters in a setting hidden away from humans, and they have to go through all these problems that are specific to them within their world. However, instead of being filled with toy references, Wreck-It Ralph is just so filled to the brim with video game cameos and animations that it's really hard not to get absorbed into this film. Take, for example, this scene. Did they really have to give the reflection of these background light poles a video game animation? Probably not, but it's the tiny details like that that make Wreck-It Ralph so perfect. Similar to WALL-E, this movie follows the relationship between two main characters. However, this time instead of being a love story, this is one about friendship. And their relationship is so lovable and relatable because they make these slip-ups, but in each of their slip-ups, you can tell where they're coming from because of how great of a job the story does in building up the characters and their motivations. You can have a really good movie, but if your characters are lackluster, chances are you're probably going to have a rough time making an impact on the audience. But this movie does so well with its connections between the characters that each scene is that much more impactful. Along with Lilo and Stitch, Wreck-It Ralph was actually the only other Disney movie to make me cry. In fact, I almost cried twice during this movie, which is pretty crazy, usually because I don't cry during that many films. I'm sure for those of you who have watched this movie already, probably know which two scenes I'm talking about. These scenes are so much more heart-wrenching because they aren't just sad scenes. They involve the dreams and emotions that have been set up the entire movie for these characters. Another thing that makes this movie so wonderful is that a lot of Disney movies usually teach lessons. However, most of these lessons are ones that a kid would know, or something we learn early on and will inevitably learn throughout our lives. The lessons in Wreck-It Ralph are some things that are still applicable to adult life, and things that we don't always learn because of our age, but rather through experience. In fact, some of the lessons I learned in this movie are still applicable to me in my 18-year-old college life. The first lesson this movie really hits home with is knowing one's self-worth and identity. Oftentimes in society, there's usually a preconceived idea of what the best version of somebody is, or a social norm. However, through Ralph, this movie shows us that You don't need to do what society expects you to be. You can work your hardest and excel in who you really are, and that's where you can really find the most self-worth. The second lesson is one that will really follow anybody throughout their entire lives. This one has to do with not losing your way on the path to your goals. People always talk about how it's more about the journey rather than the destination, and kind of similar to that, this movie teaches us about how ultimately we all have these end goals. However, along the way to those, as we're working towards them, we can't simply forget about who we really are or why we're on this journey in the first place. A great example of this is Ralph halfway through the movie. He realizes he's given up so much. He finally has the gold medal that he's wanted more than anything, but in retrospect, he only wanted it in the first place to fit in and have friends, and in the process of getting the medal, he ended up throwing away the one true friend he really had. As much as I love Wreck-It Ralph, deciding on the number one between Wreck-It Ralph and WALL-E was a really hard decision, but ultimately, even though I think WALL-E is the better made film objectively, Wreck-It Ralph connects to me on so much more of a personal level that I really find the enjoyment I wouldn't find in any other Disney movie. Good news though, I don't believe that Wreck-It Ralph really needed a sequel, but I'm still excited to watch it when it comes out this September, and I'm expecting great things. So that's gonna wrap up this video. If there's any general feedback, topics I should discuss, movies I should review, or you just want to say your top 5 Disney movie list, feel free to let me know. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time.